What if the woman in the blue dress, who knew your name, wasn't a stranger at all? On the coldest morning of the year in Chicago, a homeless man was about to discover that even still walks our streets. The wind, a living entity, roared of Lake Michigan, tearing through the glass canyon of Michigan Avenue. Holiday lights, once vibrant with shea, now flickered weakly against a merciless grey sky. Commuté, head bowed against the beating cold, hurried with crunching boots across salted sidewalks, driven towards the sanctuary of heated lobby and steaming coffee shops. The air itself stung with such sharpness that every breeze felt like an ash. Few spared a glance for the figure hunched in the shadow by St. Mary of the Angels Cathedral, a tattered military jacket's only shield. Ashy's beard, streaked with frost, trembled with each painful inhalation. A dented, damp paper cup sat before him, yet no one dropped a coin. To the relentless tide of passers-by, he was simply another soul the city had swallowed whole. That man was Daniel Brooks, 55 years old. Just 2 years prior, Daniel had been a formidable sales director, leading a team of 15, commanding boardroom, and pulling in a salary that kept a suburban humming with quiet comfort. He wore tailor suits, spoke with unwavering confidence, and drove his children Lucy, then 14, and Eden, says to soccer practice in a polished silver Ford SUV. He was a provider, a father, a husband. But then, a tsunami of layoffs swept through the tech sector. Daniel's position evaporated in a single afternoon. Anti-promise of you land on your feet they showed in his mind a resume were ignored and interview fizzled into silence. Mont bled into one another. Bill pilled eye. Ashy's wife, Sylvie, once his unwavering partner in every dream, could no longer bear the crushing weight of his despair and the silence that consumed him. Their argument escalated, growing venomous, until one day, she packed box, left the keys, and drove away with their children. Daniel tried to numb the cavernous void within him with alcohol first, just enough to sleep, then, far too much to forget. Ashy's savings vanished faster than the liquor bottle accumulating around him. Rent fell behind. Friends stopped calling. A stubborn pride prevented him from reaching out to family. Eventually, he found himself exactly where he swore he'd never be, adrift on the icy streets of Chicago, in the dead of winter. Now, in December, survival was measured hour by agonizing hour. Ashy's voice, once powerful in corporate meeting, had dwindled to a timid, cracked whisper. Please, just enough for a cup of coffee et murmure, appelé as swallowed by the blur of passing coats. Almost no one heard him. Yet, not everyone looked away. Across Michigan Avenue, Mrs. Kowalski, the owner of a small Polish bakery, noticed Daniel every morning as she stacked warm pastry behind her fog glass window. Sometimes, she would cross the street, pressing a fresh bagel into his hand, her voice carrying the comforting cadence of another era. Keep hope, monsieur. Daniel. The wheel always turn. Daniel never recalled telling her his name, yet she spoke it as if she had known him forever, a puzzling detail lost in the haze of his days. And then there was Father Patrick Ali, the parish priest. He would often step out of the cathedral into the beating air, his cassock whipping around him in the wind. There are beds at Catholic Charity, he would offer gently. You don't have to freeze out here. But each time, Daniel would shake his head, eyes cast downward, the weight of his humiliation far heavier than the relentless cold. How could he, once so respected, admit he had fallen so utterly? Around him, other lives, equally shattered, brushed past his own. Marvin, a retired machinist, shuffled by with a wall blanket rolled under his arm, his mind lost in stories of factory days no one remember. Tasha, no older than 30, clutched an infant bundled in mismatched scarves, always watchful for her abusive ex who somebody mounted this very block. Each face carried a different narrative of loss, a unique descent into the chilling anonymity of the street. We ghosts, Marvin muttered one morning. People look right through us like we never mattered. This was Daniel's life now, invisible in plain sight. To the world, he was another broken man slumped against a church wall. To himself, he was a father whose children no longer answered his calls, a husband erased from family photograph, a professional stripped of every title but one, failure. but 10 morning eltan unspoken promise. The Iron Bell above St. Mary's told date, their solemn voices echoing through the towering canyon of glass. At a shaft of winter light pierced the urban gloom, landing directly on Daniel where he sat shivering on the stone step. He rubbed his hands together, utterly unaware that the day was rapidly tilting toward something no resume, no paycheck, no divorce decree could ever explain. By nightfall, Daniel Brooks would no longer be the man Chicago ignored. He would become the heart of a story whispered with awe, first in Dead City, and then far beyond a story born in the bitter wind of a Chicago winter on Michigan Avenue, when the unseen finale chose to be seen. The December wind, a relentless tormentor, never ceased TSASO. It whipped around the corner of Michigan Avenue, tugging at scarves and rattling traffic lights against their steel pole. The morning rush throbbed with hurried footsteps and muffled phone calls, a ceaseless rhythm of indifference. Yet, amid all that movement and noise, certain figures remained utterly unseen. Daniel Brooks sat low against the cathedral's granite wall, knees pulled tight to his chest. He had long grown accustomed to this invisibility, the way people's eyes slid past him like water over glass. Their silence, he realized, was louder than any insult. But there were others, those who shared this cold exile, who noticed. Marvin often shuffled towards the cathedral step in the late morning, his wall blanket rolled under one arm like a soldier's flag. At 68, Marvin's back was bent from years spent on the factory floor of a steel plant that had long since shuttered. Ashes stories, fragments of a forgotten Eronion strike, broken machine, the acrid smell of molten iron bled out, but no one on Michigan Avenue ever stopped to listen. We built the city's bones, they grumbled to Daniel one morning, watching businessmen interpret coat stream past. Now they don't even see us. We're just shadow on the sidewalk. Some team, Tasha would appear buzzed them, no older than 30, her infant doctor strapped to her chest beneath a patchwork of scarves. The baby's breath rose in tiny, ephemeral claws against the winter air. Tasha had fled South Chicago after night fille with screaming and fist, only to find the shelter overflowing. Safer Irden at home, she de whisper, rocking her child a commuté and glad their eyes away. Her desperation was a kiebu fierce force, a mother's love straining against the suffocating weight of fear. Daniel studied this fellow wanderer with a strange blend of sorrow and profound recognition. Each of them had once been a vital part of the city's pulse, Marvin the machinist, Tasha the young mother, and himself, the director in a Taylor suite. They weren't a different species, they were fragments of the same world, broken pieces scattered by bad luck, bad choice, or an agonizing combination of both. But still, not everyone turned away. Across the street, Mrs. Kowalski wiped fog from her bakery window, her round face glowing in the warmth of her oven. She saw Daniel daily and occasionally crossed the busy traffic with a bag of day old bread. For you, she de insist, pressing it into his hand. It while it's warm. Her voice carried the gentle, singing lilt of her Polish root. Remember, the wheel always turn, monsieur. Daniel. Somehow, she spoke his name, to be was certain he had never told her. The detail puzzled him, but the warmth of her small keenness dulled the constant sting of invisibility. Then there was Father Patrick Ali, emerging from the cathedral's side door, his coat pulled tight against the beating cold. Ashes breath made small claws a knelled buzzed Daniel. You don't have to sleep out here, the priest said, his Irish cadence softened by years in Chicago. Catholic charity HAS a bed. All you need to do is come. Daniel would always shake his head, shame pulling his eyes to the pavement. How could he walk into a shelter where someone might recognize him, where his failure would be displayed under harsh fluorescent lights? Pride, he knew, was a cruel than any stone walls. Around them, the city pulsed forward, oblivious. A lawyer argued into his head set about a deal too close before Christmas. A group of college students logged, jostling into a Starbucks, the smell of espresso chasing them back out the door. A young couple posed for a selfie under a snow-dusted theater marquee, their radiant smiles stark against the city's grey. All of them walked within feet of Daniel, Marvin, and Tasha. None of them truly saw. Invisible, Marvin muttered again. That is what we are, ghosts that scare the living if they look too close. And Daniel believed him. For months, that was all his life had become, a slow, agonizing fade into transparency. A man reduced to shadow against the cathedral wall. The only proof he still existed was the persistent ache in his chest and the gnawing in his stomach. But change was already moving toward them, silent and unannounced. Within days, the man who felt unseen by the world would be called by name, not by a stranger, but by someone whose voice carried the echo of eternity itself. The Bell of St. Mary of the Angels tolled 11, their solemn wake echoing across Michigan Avenue. The midday crowd surged in wave, office workers grabbing lunch, tourists snapping photos of the skyline, students darting across busy crosswalk. Against the ancient stone step of the cathedral, Daniel Brock sat hunched, his breath visible in the beating air, his mind clouded by the same hopeless thoughts that had tormented him for months. And then, he saw her. At first, she seemed simply another passerby, a woman approaching from the far end of the avenue. But something about her slowed time itself. Her steps were unhurried, almost floating, despite the frenetic rush of the crowd. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with chestnut hair cascading over her shoulder, shimmering faintly even beneath the iron grey sky. She wore a deep blue dress and a white coat so pristine it seemed untouched by the dirty slush beneath her. Most striking of all, her bare feet graced the frozen pavement, yet she moved as if warmed by a sunlight no one else could feel. Daniel blinked hard, convinced the extreme cold was playing trick on his mind. But as she drew closer, others began to notice her too. A young couple stopped mid-argument, suddenly hushed. An old man, pulling a grocery car, turned his head and whispered something in Polish. Even Mrs. Kowalski, from across the street, paused in her bakery doorway, her eyes fixed on the luminous figure crossing Michigan Avenue, until the very traffic bent out of her way. Daniel S. had pounded, a drum against his rib. Passers-by usually looked past him, but this woman, this impossible stranger, was walking directly toward him. She stopped at the base of the step, her eyes meeting his with a tenderness he had not felt in years. And then, she smiled. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice, low and warm, resonating in a place deeper than his ear, a place within his very soul. He froze, his breath catching. No one here knew his name, not Mrs. Kowalski, not the priest, not the hurry crowd. And yet this woman spoke it as she had known him all his life. How? How do you know my HES word faltered, his throat from disuse. She reached out, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. A sudden, profound flood of warmth surged through his body, chasing out the cruel December cold that had lodged itself deep in his bones. For the first time in months, Daniel felt truly alive, not merely surviving. Your pain has not gone unnoticed, she said softly. You believe you have lost everything, your work, your home, your family. But you are wrong. You have not lost the most important thing of all, your heart. Daniel's eyes burned with sudden, stinging tears. Around them, the city clattered on horn, footsteps, distance errant. But for Daniel, sound itself seemed muffled, as if the entire world had paused to listen. A businessman slowed his pace, frowning at all confused by the faint glow around her figure. A college student lifted her phone to take a picture, but found the lamps mysteriously fogging, leaving only a blur of light. Even Father Patrick, peering out from the cathedral doors, felt a strange stirring within him, though he could not yet see the woman clearly. "He can't get back up," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking with raw emotion. "I've lost my children. They don't even answer my calls. My wife, she left because he became someone unrecognizable. I am nothing now." The woman's gaze never wavered. "No, Daniel. You are not nothing. You are beloved. And beloved does not end with failure." Her hand pressed gently against his back. And with that touch, Daniel felt the crushing weight on his chest loosen, like shame falling away into silence. "You wonder why you stay awake each morning," she continued. "It is because your journey is not finished. Tonight, push open these doors behind you. She gestured to the imposing cathedral towering above them. Go inside. Father Patrick will be waiting, Tug does not yet know why. And there you will find what your Atasha has been crying out for. Daniel stared at her, trembling, utterly unable to speak. The woman stepped back, her smile filled with a sorrowful joy, at Tug she carried the weight of every human tear, yet remained untouched by despair. She turned, moving once more into the current of the city. Within a moment, she was gone, swallowed not by the surging crowd, but by a strange, ethereal radiance that seemed to dissipate into the vast winter sky itself. Marvin, watching from his usual corner, rubbed his eyes in disbelief. Did you see that? The lady barefoot in the snow. Tasha clutched her child tighter, a tremor in her voice. She looked at him like mattered. Daniel remained motionless on the cathedral step, the profound warmth still lingering where her hand had touched his shoulder. For months, he had been utterly invisible, a shadow no one claimed. But now, Someone had called him by name, someone who should not have known him at all. And for the first time in a long, agonizing while, Daniel Brooks felt that something truly impossible was about to unfold. The next morning, the streets of Chicago seemed unchanged, grey clouds pressed low, sidewalks bore salt stain, and bus ground past in plume of exhaust. But for Daniel Brooks, something profound had shifted. The memory of the mysterious woman lay like a persistent flame in the beating cold. He still didn't know who she was or why she knew his name, but her word echoed in his chest, "Go inside tonight. Father Patrick will be waiting." He tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it away à hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or the warmth he felt a trick of adrenaline. But the day itself began to unravel with a series of strange, indéniables signes. It began with Mrs. Kowalski, the bakery owner. She crossed the street at dawn, carrying a paper bag still radiating warmth from her oven. "Here, monsieur." "Daniel," she said brightly, pressing it into his hand. "Fresh this morning." Daniel froze. "Monsieur." Daniel. She had never used his name before. In fact, he was certain he had never even told her. "How did you?" he began, but she only offered a gentle smile, as if she had spoken without realizing it. "It while it's warm," she insisted, then bustled back into her shop, leaving Daniel staring at the bag of rolls, unsettled and profoundly grateful all at once. By noon, the second ripple arrived. A businessman in a crisp navy overcoat, briefcase swinging at his side, passed Daniel's usual spot near the cathedral step. Normally, men like him gave a wide berth, their eyes fixed on screen, but this man stopped. He reached into his wallet and pressed a folded bill into Daniel's trembling hand. "Take this," he said simply, "and have courage." Then he walked on, disappearing into the tide of suits before Daniel could even utter a thank you. When Daniel unfolded the bill, his breath caught. It was a crisp $20 bill, more than he usually collected in 2 days. Nearby, Marvin, the machinist, whistled low. "Well, ELLB. That is a first." Daniel turned the bill over and over in his hand, utterly baffled. "Why today? Why now?" But the strangest moment of all came that afternoon. Daniel sat shivering as the sky darkened, when a volunteer in a bright orange vest approached. She held a clipboard, her breath clouding in the cold air. "Excuse me, are you Daniel Brooks?" The sound of his name again jolted him upright. "Yes." "Why?" Her face softened with a professional keenness. "I'm with Catholic Charity. We've had a bed open up at our shelter. The intact form specifically mention you, said we should look for Daniel Brooks on Michigan Avenue." Daniel blinked, struggling to comprehend. But he never applied. He never even gave my name. The woman shrugged, unfazed. "Some team people puis in referral. All I know is we've got a place for you. A warm bed, hot meal. We'd love for you to come in tomorrow morning at 9h. She handed him a slip of paper with the address. When she walked away, Daniel remained frozen, the paper clutched tightly in his hand. He hadn't told anyone. E hadn't signed up. Yet here it was, his name written, his place reserved. Marvin leaned over, peering at the paper. That is a good house, he said, recognition flashing in his tired eyes. Tough to get in there. Willie Star Montlon. You sure you didn't sign up? Daniel shook his head slowly, still processing. No. That night, as the cathedral bell tolled once more, Daniel stared at the heavy doors he had avoided for so long. The woman's word whispered like a current through the freezing air, go inside tonight. Father Patrick will be waiting, Tug does not yet know why. The coincidence piled too neatly, too deliberately, to ignore. Someone had spoken his name. Someone had opened doors that had been locked to him for months. And in that moment, Daniel Brooks began to wonder if the stranger in blue and white had been less acerbi and more answer. The bell of St. Mary of the Angels rang 7 times that night, their deep sound cutting through the frozen air like solemn voices calling the city to attention. The sidewalks outside the cathedral were nearly empty now, most commute already safe in their homes, windows glowing warm above the avenue. Daniel Brooks sat at the base of the step, the slip of paper from Catholic Charity still folded tightly in his pocket. The woman's voice echoed in his head, go inside tonight. Father Patrick will be waiting, Tug does not yet know why. For weeks, Daniel had actively avoided those imposing doors. He slept against the walls, but never dared to cross the threshold. To him, the cathedral belonged to the faithful, to those who had something to offer, not to men who had lost everything. Yet, something within him stirred, a pulse stronger than shame, stronger even than fear. He rose slowly, his legs stiff from the prolonged cold, and placed one trembling on the heavy wooden door. The ancient ange groaned at its swung hour, and suddenly the cacophony of the street gave way to a profound silence. Inside, the sanctuary stretched upward like a vast ocean of stone and light. Candles flickered in red glass, painting warm, shifting pull against the Gothic column. The stained glass windows glowed faintly in the dim light, their color muted but alive with hidden warmth. The air carried the fin, sweet scent of incense, ancient and otherworldly. Daniel took a tentative step onto the worn marble floor. The sound of his boots echoed louder than he expected, drawing the gaze of 2 elderly parishioners kneeling in a back pew. They did not stare long, they simply bowed their head again, whispering prayer that seemed to fold him gently into the vast silence. From a side door, Father Patrick Ali emerged, his coat draped casually over his shoulder. He paused when he saw Daniel, surprise flickering across his face. Then came something else, a key recognition he could not immediately explain. Daniel, Father Patrick said gently, his voice carrying through the empty nave. I'm glad you came. Daniel's brow furrowed in confusion. How did you know he would? The priest shook his head slowly. He didn't. But this afternoon, he felt an inexplicable urge to stay late tonight. He didn't know why. Now he do. The 2 men stood in the profound hush of the cathedral, their words swallowed by the immeasurable vastness above. Daniel lowered his gaze, shame burning hot. He don't belong here. Father Patrick stepped closer, his presence comforting. This is exactly where you belong. God's house isn't for the perfect, Daniel. It's for the broken. Et gesture gently for Daniel to follow. Reluctant, incertain, Daniel walked down the long center aisle. Each step felt impossibly heavy, if the physical weight of mount on the street still clung to his shoulder. The priest led him toward a side chapel, T.S. alcove softly lit by a single hanging lamp. There, in a beautifully carved niche of stone, stood a statue. Her hair, sculpted in rich chestnut, cascaded to her shoulder. Her robe was painted a deep, luminous blue, her mantle a pure, pristine white. Her face bore a serenity that seemed to pierce the very silence of the chapel. Daniel's breath caught, his knees suddenly weak beneath him. It was her. The woman he had seen on the step, the one who had called him by name, the one whose touch had filled his body with warmth. He staggered backward, gripping the pew for support. This can't be real. Father Patrick follow this gas to the statue and nodded knowingly. You've been sleeping here for weeks, Daniel, and yet only now do you truly see. Many before you have told similar stories. She comes when hearts are most desperate. Daniel's voice shook with disbelief. You mean to tell me the Virgin Mary was here with me on Michigan Avenue? The priest placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. I mean to tell you that even has a way of finding those who feel invisible. No one is ever forgotten, Daniel, not even in the coldest night of this city. Daniel stared at the statue, the marble face now vividly alive in his memory. He felt the warmth return, not from the ancient building, not from the flickering candle, but from something beyond comprehension, something deeply spiritual. For the first time in months, the suffocating weight in his chest finally loosened, and a fragile flicker of hope rose inside him, like a spark catching flame. That night, Daniel Brooks did not return to the cold concrete step outside. Father Patrick offered him a co in the rectory basement, clean blanket, a sturdy roof, and the profound gift of safety. For the first time in nearly a year, Daniel lay down and door, the faint echo of cathedral bell a comforting lullaby above him. And I drifted into sleep, one thought burned brighter than the shame, brighter even than the cold, she knew my name. She knew me. Morning light, pale and hesitant, sped through the narrow windows of the rectory basement. For the first time in months, Daniel Brooks awoke not to the jarring roar of traffic or the stinging assault of wind, but to the muted key of solid walls and comforting warmth. A blanket, scratchy buckling, covered him. The faint scent of coffee drifted through the air, mingled with something sweet, perhaps toast, or jam. For a terrifying moment, Daniel panicked. He wasn't accustomed to safety. His body braced for someone to shoot, to tell him he didn't belong. But then, the soft sound of footsteps descended the creaking stair, and Father Patrick appeared, holding two steaming mugs. Morning, Daniel, the priest said gently. Did you sleep? Daniel rubbed his eyes, his voice rauque with disease and emotion. Better than he can remember. Father Patrick smiled, a kind, understanding smile, and set a mug in Daniel's hand. That is what warmth will do. And a little peace. Peace. The word itself felt almost dangerous, like something so fragile it might shatter it if it clung too tightly. Late that morning, Father Patrick walked with him to Catholic Charity, just a few blocks away. The streets of Chicago still bustled with their usual indifference, busy seemed to stop, horn blaring. But Daniel felt as if he were moving through an entirely different world. For months, the city had been his enemy. Now, each block felt like a step back toward being seen, toward belonging. Inside the intact office, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. A compassionate receptionist led them to a key room where Sister Catherine, a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes softened by years of service, waited. She rose to greet Daniel, extending both hands warmly. Monsieur Brooks, we've been expecting you. Daniel hesitated, confusion clouding his face. Expecting me? But he never. Sister Catherine offered a small, knowing smile. It's the strangest thing. Yesterday morning, a woman came by. Very elegant, very serene. She told us about your situation, said you would arrive today. She didn't leave a name, only insisted that you be helped immediately. Father Patrick glanced at Daniel. Their eyes met, each thinking the same unspoken thought. Sister Catherine continued, opening a desk drawer. She also left this envelope. Said it was to help you start again with dignity. She slid it across the desk. Inside lay 5 crisp, perfectly new $100 bills. Daniel stared, utterly stunned. His hand trembled as he lifted the envelope. For months, he hadn't held more than a few crumpled singles at a time. Now, $500 lay before him, an impossible gift from an nameless stranger. Why? Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Why would she do this for me? Sister Catherine's eyes softened furtively. Some team, Daniel, angels take form we don't expect. What matters is that El Pasha is arrived. The rest is mystery. That afternoon, they showed Daniel to a small room at the shelter barely larger than a closet, yet it contained a bed, a small armoire, and a sink. He stood in the doorway, staring at the clean sheets, at the neatly folded towel, at the humble light bulb booming overhead. To anyone else, it might have looked utterly ordinary. To Daniel, it was solid ground. He touched the pillow as if it might vanish. For the first time in nearly a year, he could close a door behind him and know, with absolute certainty, that he was safe. The next hour passed in a blur of rediscovery. A shower with hot water, scalding away the grime of Mont. A razor scraping the matted beard from his jaw until his reflection in the mirror began to resemble the man he once knew. A clean shirt, donated but pressed, that fit well enough to stir memory of boardroom and conference calls. When he stepped back into the common area, Sister Catherine noticed the change immediately. "There you are," she said warmly, her eyes twinkling. He thought he was speaking to a different man. Daniel lowered his head, embarrassed by the sudden sting of tears that pricked his eyes. He felt human again. From across the room, Marvin watched in disbelief. "Would you look at that?" Danny Boy cleaned up. Ashes Stone carried a teasing pride, but his tired eyes held something else entirely, hope. Daniel sat down, holding a tray of food, real food hot soup, fresh bread, a crisp apple. He hadn't tasted anything like it in months. Each bit felt like a sacrament, a communion with life itself. That night, when he lay down in his small bed, the sounds of the city muffled by solid walls, Daniel whispered into the dark. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to God, to the mystery woman, or simply to himself, but the word came from deep within, "Thank you." And for the first time since his life had collapsed, that word did not feel hollow. The sun had already dipped behind Chicago's towering skyline when Daniel Brock stepped once more onto the ancient stone step of St. Mary of the Angels. The city hummed in its usual December rhythm, bus sighing at their stop, headlights streaking across Michigan Avenue, distance siren echoing off the high rises. But for Daniel, the pervasive noise faded into the background. Ashes had pulsed with a new kind of anticipation, a vibrant, unfamiliar rhythm. All day, his mind had replayed Sister Catherine's word, a very elegant lady came by. She knew your story. She asked us to help you first. The envelope of crisp bill still lay folded in his pocket like a fragile promise, almost too good to trust. He couldn't explain it. He could only feel, with every fibre of his being, that whatever had begun yesterday was far from finished. Then he saw her. She was seated on the same step where they had first met, her posture impossibly graceful, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the street lamp. The blue dress shimmered finely beneath her white coat, utterly untouched by the frost that clung to the stone. And again, her feet were bare, resting calmly against the freezing pavement at which the brutal cold could not even touch her. Daniel froze mid-step, his breath hitched. Pedestrians streamed past, bundled in scarves and hat, yet none seemed to notice her. To them, she might well have been invisible. But to Daniel, she was the only living presence on the entire street. "Good evening, Daniel," she said, rising smoothly, as if she had been waiting for him all along. Ashes' voice cracked, raw with emotion. "Oh? Who are you? Why are you doing this for me?" She stepped closer, her gaze profoundly tender, her words steady and clear. "I am the one who cannot bear to see my children suffer without hope." Daniel's throat tightened. "Children," he managed, barely a whisper. She nodded softly. "Yes, you." He wanted to speak, to demand answer, but she continued before he could. "You believe you've lost everything, your dignity, your home, your family. But you are wrong. You still carry the most powerful gift of all, a heart that knows how to break. That heart, Daniel, is not your weakness. It is your strength. It is what will allow you to lift others who are broken." Tears blurred his vision, hot and fresh. "But I can't even lift myself. My children, Lucy and Eden, they won't even look at me." The woman is eyes glistened, if she carried her pain, tout. Lucie long for her fater et s'embrasse, tout ganger idit. Eden it behind pride, Buffy is what truly shine him. They are not lost to you, Daniel. They are waiting. Daniel staggered back, completely undone. His voice trembled with an almost primal plea. How do you know their names? I've never told you. Her smile deepened, edged with a sadness that felt ancient, timeless. When you love someone, you know their joie and their wound. I know because I love them I love you. Silence stretched between them, vast and profound. The rush of traffic felt miles away. Daniel's breath came in shallow, ragged burst. For the first time in years, he felt utterly stripped bare, yet not judged, only profoundly understood. She placed her hand gently over his hat. Warmth spread through him again, more powerful than before, a sacred fire. Your suffering was not wasted, Daniel. It has prepared you. Others are waiting in the shadow of this city. Men and women who believe they are invisible. You will remind them they are seen. You will carry the light you've been given. He shook his head in disbelieving how. Me. I'm nobody. I'm a failure. Her voice grew firm, yet remained infinitely tender. No, Daniel. You are chosen. And chosen does not mean perfect. It means willing. Pedestrian hurried past, entirely unaware that on this cathedral step, a man's very destiny was being rewritten. She drew back slightly, her figure glowing faintly in the lamplight. Tomorrow, begin again. Walk among those who suffer you have suffered. Share what you've received, and when the weight feels too heavy, remember you are not alone. Daniel tried to speak, but his words dissolved into choked sob. He fell to his knees on the cold stone, not from weakness, but from overwhelming awe and spiritual humility. When he looked up again, she was already moving into the deepening night, blending seamlessly into the shadow of Michigan Avenue. Within seconds, she was gone. Daniel remained there, chest heaving, tears freezing against his cheek. And yet, for the first time in years, he had burned with something stronger than shame. It burned with a fierce, indeniable mission. At Emma House, new residents often arrived carrying nothing but a tattered plastic bag, their face hollowed by countless nights on the street. They came broken, defensive, and utterly exhausted, expecting only judgment or stark indifference. But within weeks of his arrival, Daniel Brooks began to stand out, not because he demanded attention, but because he gave it, freely and without expectation. The staff noticed first. Sister Catherine, who had processed countless attacks in her 30 years, saw it in the way Daniel listened. He didn't rush conversation or glance impatiently at the clock. When another resident spoke, he leaned in, his tired eyes reflecting every word if it held profound importance. He listened like someone who has been to the bottom, she confided one evening to Father Patrick, and people trust him because of it. It started with Marcus, a 25-year-old in detox, weary and restless. H.I.S. Angers filled the dormitory like a creed smoke. Staff couldn't reach him. He rejected advice, pushed away counselor, and snarled at anyone who offered help. But Daniel didn't try to fix him. He simply sat down beside him one night in the cafeteria, stirring a bowl of soup. You look like you don't want to be here, Daniel said softly, without judgment. Marcus glared. And you do? Daniel shrugged, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. No, beer is better than under the viaduct. He know. He was there last week. That simple, honest admission broke through Marcus's formidable wall. He blinked, his shoulders sagging. For the first time since he arrived, he spoke without rage. Hours passed he poured out his story, abuse, addiction, the knowing shame of disappointing his mother. Daniel never interrupted. He just listened, nodding, offering the occasional, keyword, he know that feeling. I've been there, too. By the next morning, Marcus was palpably calmé. He told another resident. Et est-ce not preaching? Et est-ce juste réal? Denkam Tasha, the young mother Daniel had seen shivering on Michigan Avenue. She arrived at Emma house one bitter evening, her baby cry showing painfully through the intake room. The paperwork was a nightmare. The waitlist for stable housing seemed endless. Her frustration boiled over in raw, uncontrollable tears. Daniel stepped in, gently guiding her through each complex form, making calls to agency et once been too ashamed to deal for himself. Et even held the baby while Tasha cocked her breath, rocking the infant with a practiced ease. You've a got Someone in your corner now, he told her, bouncing the baby gently. For the first time, Tasha allowed herself to believe it. Word spread quietly among the residents. Talk to Daniel, they began to say. He knows what it's like. Even the staff couldn't ignore the ripple effect. Case that had been stalled for months suddenly moved forward. Marcus was offered a coveted spot at a recovery center that had been perpetually full. Tasha received notice that a subsidized apartment had opened, far sooner than anyone expected. Another resident, Ahmed, a 58-year-old former engineer from Tunisia, landed a job interview within days of confiding his struggle to Daniel. These things don't just happen, Sister Catherine whispered one evening as she watched Daniel sit with a group of men, who leaning toward him if carried some secret gravity. Everywhere he touched, doors open, Father Patrick nodded, his eyes too full. Perhaps it's not just him. Perhaps grace is multiplying through him. The resident noticed, too. Marvin, the machinist who once muttered about being invisible, now affectionately called Daniel the mayor of the dorm. Other followed his quiet, selfless lead, helping new arrivals settle in, sharing meal, offering what little encouragement they could muster. Daniel himself never claimed credit. He don't know why things are changing, he admitted one night to Marcus. All he knows is when she touched my shoulder, something lit up inside me. Maybe I'm just meant to pass it on. The young man frowned, intrigued. She? Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes shining with a deep, private memory. Someone who reminded me that nobody is invisible. For the first time in a long while, Emma was pulsed with a tangible hope. Staff described it a profound shift in atmosphere, like stale, stagnant and replaced with a rush of fresh, invigorating breeze. Residents began to believe that change was truly possible, not just for Daniel, but for themselves. In a city where so many stories of homelessness ended in tragic silence, here was one beginning to unfold differently. Grace was spreading, one heartfelt conversation, one compassionate act of listening, one incident at a time. And in the key moment when Daniel lay awake in his narrow bed, he felt it, too. The mission had indeed begun. Snow flurry swirled down Michigan Avenue like feathers shaken from an unseen sky. Inside Emma house, the comforting scent of chili drifted from the kitchen, mingling faintly with a sharp bit of disinfectant. Residents lined up with plastic tray, murmuring in low, hushed voices. It felt like any other winter afternoon until the receptionist's voice crackled through the intercom. Monsieur Brooks, you have a visitor in the lobby. Daniel froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. He hadn't heard those words in over a year. For a moment, he thought there must be some mistake. Visitor hardly came for anyone here. But I walked down the corridor, his step heavy with disbelief, he saw her through the glass doors. A teenage girl stood nervously, backpack slung over one shoulder, strand of dark hair tucked behind her ear. It was Lucy, his daughter. She looked older, taller than when he had last seen her. Her face had thinned into the fragile beauty of adolescence, but her eyes carried something else, a complex tangle of hurt, confusion, and fin, uncertain hope. When Daniel pushed open the door, his throat locked, emotion seizing him. The girl once carried on his shoulder at Navy Pier now stood before him like a stranger. Dad, she said softly, the word breaking between her lips if it had been locked away for far too long. H.I.S. eyes instantly filled with tears. Lucy, my little girl. Her backpack slipped to the floor as she took a hesitant step closer. She didn't rush into his arms, not yet. Instead, she studied him, her gaze searching, I've deciding whether the man in front of her was truly her father or just a ghost wearing his face. How did you find me? He whispered, his voice trembling. Lucy hesitated, glancing down at the floor before meeting his gaze. A woman came to my school yesterday. She told me you were here. She said you were better now. Her voice cracked with emotion. She said, if you didn't come see him, you'd regret it for the rest of your life. Daniel's had pounded a furious rhythm. What did she look like? Lucy's eyes lifted, a flicker of memory in them. Beautiful. Long brown hair, a blue dress under a white coat. She seemed, I don't know, like she knew everything about us. The description pierced Daniel like a bolt of lightning. He swallowed hard, unable to speak, his mind reeling. Tears brimmed in Lucy's eyes, then spilled down her cheek. Dad, he was so mad at you. When Mom left, he blamed you. He hated picking up the phone and hearing silence. He told himself he didn't need you anymore. But her voice broke into wrenching sob. He missed you so much. Daniel's knees buckled. He lowered himself until he was eye level with her, just as he had done countless times when she was small and scraped her knee. As she trembled, I reached out, waiting, not forcing. My sweet Lucy, he whispered, his own tears spilling freely. You have nothing to apologize for. He failed you. He failed all of us, but he never stopped loving you. Not for a single second. At last, she collapsed into his arms, her sob muffled against his chest. The years of festering anger and suffocating silence melted away, dissolving into the warmth of an embrace both had dreamed of, but never truly expected to feel again. From across the lobby, Sister Catherine stood quietly, her hands folded, tears glistening in her own eyes. She had witnessed many reunions, but rarely one sorrow, so steeped in grace. Other residents paused in the hallway, watching the poignant scene unfold. Marvin muttered, looked like the kid found the old man. Marcus, arms folded but rare, soft smirk on his face, nodded. About time for Daniel. The world shrank to the profound weight of his daughter in his arms. He breathed in the faint, familiar scent of her hair, still carrying the sweetness of childhood mingled with the uncertain tang of growing up too fast. When she finally pulled back, her face wet with tears, she looked at him with something new, something fragile, trust beginning to flicker. Can he come back? Can he see you again? Daniel nodded, his own tears still spilling. You never lost me, and he'll never lose you again. Outside, snow continued to fall, dusting the gritty streets of Chicago. But in the lobby of Emma House, a profound warmth spread through hearts that had been frozen for far too long. For the first time since his collapse, Daniel Brooks was no longer just a man clawing his way back from despair. He was a father again, and it had all begun with a woman in blue and white who refused to let a family remain broken. The Saturday sky hung low and grey over Chicago, the keen that promised snow but delivered only a beating, relentless wind. Daniel Brooks stood on the front step of a modest brick apartment building on the city's northwest side. She trembled, not from the cold, but from what waited inside. It had been more than a year since he last walked through this door, the door to the place his wife, Sylvie, now called home with their children. He had rehearsed a dozen speeches on the bus ride over, each one collapsing under the immense weight of fear and shame. How do you face the family you've lost? How do you ask for a second chance when you squander the last one so spectacularly? The door opened before he could knock again. It was Lucy. She offered him a nervous but encouraging smile. Come on, Dad. They were waiting. The word Dale pressed against his chest like a heavy stone. Inside, the living room carried echo of what once was. The Sam family photograph still adorned the walls, vacation to Wisconsin, birthday celebrated around sheet cake. But the frames looked heavy now, a too weighed down by absence and unspoken sorrow. On the couch sat Eden, now 16 years old, arms crossed, jaw set in a rigid line. He looked so much like Daniel at that age, it was almost cruel. Beside him stood Sylvie, teen Eden Daniel remembered, her beauty sharpened by years of worry. Hello, Daniel, she said carefully, her voice guarded. You look different. Différent. Not better, not worse, juste différent. Daniel sat down across from Eden, he sat pounding a frantic rhythm. Silence, thick and heavy, stretched between them until Eden broke it, his voice lasted with cold danger. So, you're back. Why now? Because you finally decided to get your act together? The word cut sharper than the wind outside, but Daniel didn't flinch. He leaned forward, elbow on his knees, meeting his son défiant gaze. You're right to be angry, Eden, he said, his voice robust steady. He was a coward. He let shame and failure crush me, and he disappeared when you needed me most. That is on me, not on you. Eden's eyes burned with resentment. You abandon us. You let mom carry everything while you drowned yourself. His voice cracked, betraying the deeper pain beneath his anger, but his posture remained rigidly defensive. And now you just walk back in like nothing happened? Daniel's voice broke then, finally. No, son. He walked back in because everything happened, and because he refused to let that be the end of our story. For the first time, Eden's carefully constructed mask faltered. His shook a shot to his feet, shouting, I'm scared. Okay, I'm scared he'll end up like you. The raw, agonizing confession ripped through the key room. Lucy gasped, her eyes wide. Sylvie closed her eyes, fighting a fresh wave of tears. Daniel stood slowly, closing the space between them. His voice was steady now, to be sown tears fell freely down his face. Look at me, Eden. Yes, he failed. He lost everything. But failure doesn't define a man, son. What defines him is what he does after. My strength now isn't in a paycheck or a title. It's in helping others get back up when they fall. That is the only kind of strength that truly matters, at last. And you, son, you already have it. Eden's eyes wavered, the fight draining visibly from him. He looked at his mother, then back at his father. The ange, a phantom ash, but beneath it, a boy's profound fear softened into desperate longing. Sylvie stepped forward, her voice quiet firm. Eden, your father has walked through fire, but he is standing here now, not as a man who fell, but as a man who rose. Can't you see that? The boy's lips quivered. At last, he whispered, he thought he'd lost you forever. Daniel pulled him into his arms. For a brief moment, Eden resisted, a final vestige of his pride, then he collapsed against his father's chest. Daniel held him tight, feeling the raw, unfiltered weight of his son's fear and love mingled together. Lucy wiped her eyes, smiling through her own tears. Sylvie turned away, covering her mouth, unable to hide the profound emotion that years of separation had not erased. In that small living room, surrounded by all photograph and painful memory, something shifted. Not a full reconciliation, not yet, but the first fragile thread of unity was being rewoven. For the Brooks family, the hardest conversation had finally begun. And for the first time in years, hope had a seat at their table. By late spring, the air in Chicago softened. The bitter, cutting wind had driven away two gentle lake breeze carrying the sweet scent of rain and budding trees. But the change outside was nothing compared to the profound transformation that had taken root inside Daniel Brooks. At Emma House, resident now spoke of him if he were staff, to be remained a resident himself. He guided men through complex application, sat with women patiently filling out housing form, and played peekaboo with children whose laughter had been silent for far too long. When dispute flared in the dormitory, Daniel's quiet, steady presence often calmed them before fist could even rise. Every time I step in, Sister Catherine marveled one evening, it's like a spark is lit, and doors just open. People who had utterly given up suddenly move forward. Father Patrick saw it, too. He began meeting with Daniel each evening, listening intently a recounted conversation, shared moment of prayer, and described the strange coincidence that continued to unfold around him. It's not coincidence, Daniel, the priest reminded him gently. Grace follow where you walk because you chose to carry it. Word began to spread beyond the walls of Emmaus. A local journalist covering a feature on Chicago's shelter system overheard resident praising Daniel Esquier, yet profound influence. ES one of US, Bu et lift US, Marvin told the reporter with fierce pride. ES living proof you can fall all the way down and still rise again. The article, which detailed Daniel's extraordinary journey from corporate office to city sidewalk to shelter, printed his name. Soon after, Daniel received an invitation and never expected, from City Hall. The mayor's office was piloting a new initiative to address homelessness in Chicago, and they wanted Daniel know a case study, Bu a coordinator. Your experience, the deputy mayor explained, her voice earnest, give you credibility no policy paper can match. You understand the streets because you've lived them. Daniel sat stunned in the ornate office, the city's sprawling skyline visible beyond the tall, grand windows. Only a year earlier, he had begged for coin outside this very government district, invisible to the suits rushing past. Now, he was being asked to shape solution. I'll do it, he said quietly, his voice firm. But only if he keep living at Emmaus. He wanted help from a distance. He need to stay close to the people he serve. The deputy mayor hesitated, a brief moment of surprise on her face, then nodded decisively. If that is what makes you effective, monsieur. Brox, will support it wholeheartedly. News of the appointment spread quickly among the residents. Marcus grinned, slapping Daniel heartily on the back. From the streets to City Hall, man. You're orgy now. Tasha, rocking her baby, added softly, her eyes filled with a plea. Don't forget us when you sit in those fancy meetings. Daniel smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. He can't forget you. You're the reason I'm there. The program launched that summer. Daniel worked tirelessly alongside city official, church leader, and various non-profit to connect shelter, job training, and housing program. He became the crucial bridge, linking the people who wrote the policy with the very people who lived their consequences. At press conference, he spoke plainly, without any trace of flourish or self-importance. Homelessness isn't a statistic, he told the camera, it's gas direct and honest. It's Marvin. It's Tasha. It was me. And behind each name is a story worth saving. HIS word rippled across the city, not a political speech, but a powerful, indeniable testimony. Yet, Daniel remained profoundly humble. Each evening, he returned to Emmaus, sharing meal, listening to stories, offering comfort, and praying quietly in the chapel. To the residents, he was still one of them, shaving in the same bathroom, folding donated cloth, offering solace in whispered conversation long after lights out. Sylvie watched from a distance, stunned by the sheer depth of his transformation. You're not the man he left, she admitted one Sunday when she visited with Lucy and Eden. You're more than that mensonge, softé, beau tatons. Daniel didn't answer with word. He simply looked at his children, then at Sylvie, and smiled through glistening tears. For the city, Daniel Brox had become a symbol of profound resilience. For Emmaus, he was living proof that dignity, once lost, could be restored. For his family, he was slowly, painstakingly, becoming a father and husband again. And for himself, he was beginning to understand that the woman in blue and white had not just saved him, she had appointed him. A year had passed since that night Daniel Brox first pushed open the heavy, creaking doors of St. Mary of the Angels. The Chicago skyline still glistened with the same glass and steel, an unyielding monument of ambition. But for him, the city now looked entirely different. Whereas he saw only indifference and shadow, he now saw faces new, face had helped, face that reminded him daily of the extraordinary second chance he had been given. The Mary House Center, a beautifully renovated building on the city's west side, stood as the clearest, most tangible sign of that second chance. Daniel, working tirelessly alongside Sister Catherine and Father Patrick, had helped transform it into a vibrant hub of shelter, job training, and family counseling. Every wall within ETS embrace now carry the unspoken stories of men reunited with their children, women stepping into safe, stable housing, and teens leaving the harsh streets for the promise of classroom. On opening day, the community gathered in the gymnasium, now transformed into a makeshift chapel. Folding cheerfully the room, lined with a diverse tapestry of residents, devoted volunteers, city officials, and family, 11 fractured, now mending. The mayor gave a brief, congratulatory speech, but all eyes turned to Daniel when he stood at the podium. His voice carried no grandeur, no political polish, only the steady, unshakable conviction of a man who had walked through both the deepest darkness and the most brilliant light. I am not here because he was strong, he said, his gaze sweeping across the face before him. I am here because grace found me when he was invisible, and he believe, with every fibre of my being, that grace is meant to be shared. Every one of you, no matter how far you've fallen, carry a heart that can rise again. A wave of heartfelt applause rose like a tide, but Daniel's gaze drifted to the back of the room. There, barely visible among the celebrating crowd, stood a woman in a blue dress and a pristine white coat. Her smile was serene, her eyes glistening with a profound, maternal pride. And then, just as quickly as I saw her, she was gone. In her place, on the empty chair, lay a single, perfect white rose. Latte, Lucy would find the flower and place it carefully into her phaeteressant. She was here, wasn't she? The girl whispered, a question that was also a knowing statement. Daniel only nodded, tears shining openly in his eyes. At home, the Brox family was mending, slowly, surely. Lucy, once distant and resentful, now spent evening helping at Maria's house, writing moving blog posts about the people she met and the resilience she witnessed. Eden, no longer closed off, now spoke passionately of studying social work in college. "I want to do what you do, Dad," he said one night, his voice brimming with admiration. "I want to be there for people when they think they're done." Sylvie, too cautious at first, found herself irresistibly drawn back, not to the man she had left, but to the profoundly transformed man he had become. "You're different now," she told him one evening as they walked hand in hand past the shimmering lakefront. "Not just healed, Daniel. Transformed." He looked at her, the wind tugging gently at her scarf, and replied simply, without a conviction, "It wasn't me. It was who made me on those steps." In the bustling heart of the city, whisper continued to spread. Resident of Emma House spoke of the man who carried blessing wherever he went. Volunteer testified to doors opening miraculously just when resources seemed utterly depleted. And among officials at City Hall, Daniel was no longer just a symbol, but a trusted, indispensable partner. Yet Daniel never claimed credit for any of it. Each night before heading home, he slipped into the quiet sanctity of the cathedral. Sommetim sat in profound silence. Sommetim près d'Alou, his voice soft but resonant. Always, he looked toward the statue in the side chapel, the very image that had stepped off the stone and onto the unforgiving streets of Michigan Avenue. "Thank you," he would whisper, "for not leaving me invisible." For Daniel Brox, the miracle was not only that the Virgin Mary had appeared to him in his darkest hour. The true miracle was that her divine touch turned his profound collapse into a powerful, enduring calling. Her word had become flesh in his life, a living testament. The fall does not define you. The rising does. And so, in the vibrant, sprawling heart of Chicago, a man once broken beyond recognition now stood a living proof that hope does not vanish in the cold. It only wait, patiently, for the moment when some dare to see, to listen, to believe. Because somewhere in every city, on every forgotten corner, a mother in blue and white still walks. And she calls each of her children by name.